Imagine an army so vast it had conquered more territory in a single century than the Roman Empire had in 5. A political and military force so dominant it stretched from the sands of Arabia to the Atlantic coast. An army that, in a few brutal years, had smashed one of Europe's most powerful kingdoms to dust. It was an unstoppable tide, a military phenomenon that seemed to defy the very laws of human conflict. For the fractured kingdoms of Europe, it was not a question of if this tide would arrive, but when. And the answer came in the year 732. A colossal force, an entire way of life on the march, was now poised to swallow the land of the Franks. How could a collection of weak, bickering kingdoms, led by a man who wasn't even a king, possibly stand against such power? This is the story of a desperate gamble, a clash of two worlds, and the one man who had the courage and the genius to stand in the way. In the next 13 minutes, you will discover the real human story behind one of history's most pivotal battles, a moment where a single man's sacrifice and determination forged the future of a continent. To understand what was at stake, you have to picture the world in the early 8th century. The Umayyad Caliphate was an absolute behemoth. From its heartland in Damascus, it expanded with a speed and ferocity that shocked the known world. It swept across North Africa, and in 711 AD, a force of Arab and Berber warriors crossed the strait into what we now call Spain. Within a matter of years, the once proud Visigothic kingdom simply ceased to exist, its armies shattered, its cities captured. From their new base in Al-Andalus, the Umayyad commanders looked north, past the Pyrenees Mountains, and saw a land that looked ripe for the taking. This was Gaul, the land of the Franks. Their first moves were swift and brutal. Raids were launched across the border, sacking towns and plundering holy sites. For years, they sowed terror and chaos, testing the defenses of the southern Frankish lords. The most powerful man in southern Gaul was Odo, the Duke of Aquitaine. He was a capable leader, and in a fleeting moment of hope, he had won a major victory at the Battle of Toulouse. But it was only a temporary fix. The Umayyads didn't take setbacks well. In 732, a new and much more powerful force was assembled, led by a commander named Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi. This time, Duke Odo was outmatched. At the Battle of the River Garonne, Abd al-Rahman's cavalry dealt Odo's army a crushing defeat. The city of Bordeaux was captured and sacked. A chronicler of the time wrote that God alone knows the number of the slain. Beaten and desperate, Duke Odo fled north. His lands were burning, his army was shattered. There was only one person left who could possibly stand against the storm. He was a rival, a man Odo had fought against before, but the threat was so huge he had no other choice. With his reputation in tatters, the once proud Duke rode to plead for help from the real ruler of the northern Franks, a man whose military genius was already legendary. His name was Charles. Charles wasn't a king. In the messy politics of the Frankish kingdoms, the kings were mostly figureheads. The real power belonged to the mayor of the palace, a title Charles had won for himself through ruthless ambition and military skill. He was a hardened veteran who had spent years unifying the northern Franks under his iron-fisted rule. His men were loyal because he led from the front and always delivered victory. When the desperate Duke Odo showed up begging for help, Charles agreed, but on one condition. Odo had to swear loyalty to him, recognizing Charles as the ruler of all Gaul. With his duchy in flames, Odo had no choice but to agree. Charles had been watching the Umayyads for years. He knew this wasn't just another raid. It was an existential threat. He also knew that the typical Frankish armies, made up of local levies, wouldn't be enough. He had spent years building something different. At the heart of his army was a corps of professional, battle-hardened infantry, men who had fought with him all over Europe. Charles's strategy was brilliant. He didn't rush south to meet Abd al-Rahman on an open plain, which would have favored the Umayyad cavalry. Instead, he let Abd al-Rahman push further north, letting his supply lines get longer and his army get weighed down with the immense plunder from the sack of Bordeaux. Charles marched his own army south using old, overlooked Roman roads, moving in secret to achieve total surprise. He wasn't just marching to a battle, he was marching to a battlefield he had personally chosen. He found the perfect spot somewhere between the cities of Poitiers and Tours. It was high ground, a wooded ridge that would force the Umayyad cavalry to charge uphill, killing their momentum. The trees would help break up their formations before they even reached his lines. Here, Charles set up his army and simply waited. He arranged his men shoulder to shoulder in a dense, cohesive block, an immovable object placed right in the path of an unstoppable force. For nearly a week, the two armies just stared each other down. There were a few skirmishes, but Abd al-Rahman hesitated, surprised to find such a large, disciplined army waiting for him. Charles used the time to let his men get used to the cold October weather, a climate his northern Franks were much more suited for than the invaders. Finally, after about a week, Abd al-Rahman, with winter approaching and his army eager for the rumored riches at the Abbey of Tours, gave the order to attack. The air grew thick with tension, with the weight of every man's life hanging in the balance. But here's what historians got wrong. This was not a battle of two equal armies, but of two different worlds, a new kind of army waiting to test a new kind of warfare. On a cold morning in October of 732, the battle began with the Thunder of Hooves. Abd al-Rahman unleashed his cavalry, trusting the same tactic that had won him so many victories. Wave after wave of horsemen charged up the slope, trying to smash the Frankish line and create chaos. But they hit something they'd never seen before. The Frankish line didn't bend. It didn't break. It held. The men stood shoulder to shoulder, a wall of wood and steel that threw the first wave back in a gruesome mess of men and horses. The Frankish spears created a deadly barrier that horses refused to charge into a second time. Abd al-Rahman sent another wave, and another. Each time, the result was the same. The Frankish infantry absorbed the shock and held their ground. Arab sources say that Muslim cavalry did manage to break into the square at times, but incredibly the Franks didn't panic. They just sealed the gaps, closing ranks and destroying the horsemen trapped inside the wall of bodies. This was a brutal, grinding war of attrition. The Umayyad army's greatest strengths, speed and flexibility, were completely useless against Charles's choice of terrain and his army's iron discipline. After hours of bloody, fruitless attacks, the critical moment arrived. A rumor ripped through the Umayyad ranks that the Franks were attacking their camp in the rear, where all the plunder from the campaign was stored. It's possible Charles had sent a small force to do just that. The effect was instant. Fearing the loss of their wealth, a large number of cavalrymen broke off from the main attack and galloped back to defend their camp. The rest of the army saw this and thought it was a general retreat. Panic started to set in. Wait until you see what happens next. It was in this chaos that the second, decisive event happened. Abd al-Rahman, a brilliant commander, rode into the thick of the fighting to rally his men. Alone and unsupported, the commander who had led his army from Africa to the heart of France was cut down and killed. The death of their leader shattered what was left of the Umayyad army's morale. Now leaderless and panicked, the army broke completely, dissolving into a mob of men trying to save themselves. Here, Charles showed his tactical genius once again. It would have been easy to break formation and order a full-blown chase to slaughter the fleeing enemy. But he refused. A chaotic pursuit down the hill could run straight into a trap. He kept his men in their shield wall, a victorious, immovable block on the high ground, as the enemy retreated back to their camp. He had won. The battle was over. The wall of ice had held, and the tide had been broken against it. The next morning, the Franks were still in formation, worried about a surprise attack. But scouts returned with incredible news. The Umayyad camp was deserted. Under the cover of darkness, the entire surviving army had abandoned their tents, their wounded, and their plunder, and had begun a desperate retreat back towards Spain. The victory was decisive. The threat of a full Umayyad conquest of Gaul was over. But here's the most important detail. While the Battle of Tours cemented Charles Martel's authority, it was not the sole reason the Umayyad advance stopped. This final detail will change everything. Raids continued in the years that followed, and Charles had to campaign relentlessly for the rest of his life to secure the southern frontier. The true strategic factor that halted Umayyad expansion was an internal rebellion, the great Berber revolts of 740. This uprising consumed the Umayyads' resources and attention for years, fragmenting their power in the west and preventing them from ever again assembling a force on the scale of Abd al-Rahman's to challenge the Franks. The victory at Tours and the political power it granted Charles gave the Franks the breathing room they needed. It was tactical perfection, combined with a distant, unforeseen geopolitical event that truly secured the future of a continent. The legacy of Charles Martel and the Battle of Tours has inspired countless works of art and scholarship. While there is no single marked battlefield, a modern pilgrimage can take you to the area between Poitiers and Tours in west-central France, where the ghost of this epic struggle hangs in the air. For deeper reading, modern scholarship like Alessandro Barbero's Charlemagne, Father of a Continent, or Ed West's The Path of the Martyrs, offers a nuanced look at the period. The brutal fighting on that cold autumn day did more than just win a battle. It drew a line in the sand. It was a clash of worlds between the mobile cavalry that had conquered half the known world and the disciplined infantry that refused to break. The victory gave the fractured kingdoms of Western Europe the breathing room they needed to grow, evolve, and eventually build the world we recognize today. If you enjoyed this journey into the heart of a pivotal moment in history, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Your support helps us tell more of these powerful human stories.